Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And welcome to Talking with Teachers. I'm your host, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, here once again with a very special guest, Dr. Youssef Ismail. Dr. Youssef Ismail is a scholar of mechanical engineering with field specialties in astronomy, mathematics, physics, and the history of science, and Maliki Fiqh. At Zaytuna College, Dr. Ismail has taught Maliki Fiqh 1 and 2, mathematics, history of science, astronomy, and geometry. Dr. Ismail receives his BS in engineering from California State University, Northridge in 1990. He went on to earn both his MS and PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford University in 1991 and 1996, respectively. Prior to his post at Zaytuna College, Dr. Yousef was an engineer at Space Systems and Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. He was also a science instructor, mentor, and curriculum developer at Shamahal, probably mispronouncing that, but Shamahal Science Workshop. His PhD thesis titled Interactive Simulation of Resin Transfer Molding illustrates the use of computer code for simulating the resin transfer molding process, whatever that is. He's also founder, I believe, if not co-founder of Crescent Watch. And so I do think that today, inshallah, we'll all get an opportunity to see the face of Crescent Watch. For those who are familiar with it, Crescent Watch is an important moon sighting website, which has been serving the Muslim community internationally for some years now. So we'd like to bring to the screen Dr. Youssef Ismail. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Good day wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dr. Abdullah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, Dr. Yousef, inshallah. Great seeing you. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, how's your day going for you?
So far, so good, mashallah. It's been a nice day. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. I heard you're at the farmer's market today.
Yeah, I do that every Sunday. Every chance I get on Sundays when it's open, I display the photography that I've been doing for the last 30 years now. So alhamdulillah. Yeah. And the moon is what kind of started that whole thing in the first place with the photography.
Yeah. SubhanAllah. Yeah, it's really an honor, an opportunity to speak to you today. And it looked like you're having a little bit of trouble with your Wi-Fi, your connection. Your screen is
a little bit shaky.
Okay.
It says here we're up in the mountains. It's a little bit shaky.
Okay.
Inshallah, we'll manage, inshallah.
Okay, yeah, inshallah. As long as you're still with me, I just want to make sure you're still with me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, the way we usually begin these episodes is to speak about our guests. So, as I mentioned before, I would say that, of course, you are the face of Crescent Watch, so people will now finally see the face of Crescent Watch. We can talk a little bit about that later on, but want to speak a little bit about you yourself. Who is Dr. Youssef Ismail, or who is your Youssef Ismail? What is your, sort of family background, ethnicity, upbringing? What was your journey? How did you come to be a professor at Zaytuna College? And what is your history with Zaytuna College?
Well, I don't know who was Youssef Ismail. Just a kid who grew up in Southern California to Syrian parents. My grandfather actually immigrated here to the United States back in the late 1800s, probably early 1900s. Came in through Ellis Island and had friends, I think, in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where he spent some time there. And he came when he was 14 years old, which is really kind of on a ship, right? And really kind of just doesn't compute with just thinking of a 14-year-old traveling around the world like that. But he came. Wow. He worked at the Ohio cast iron stove company, and then moved to Detroit and worked for the Ford Motor Company, working on the Model T. And so he stayed here in the United States off and on, I think, for about 20 years. He'd made several trips back and forth to Syria. He became a naturalized citizen, and then on his final journey back to Syria, he got married, and then never bothered coming back to the States. But his as his children were being born, and he had nine children, his first five, he registered them with the U.S. consulate, And so since he was a U.S. citizen, they had U.S. citizenship as well, as long as they came to the States before age 30. And I guess they had to register or something here in the States at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So then my father and three of my uncles immigrated in the mid-50s.
Okay.
And settled in Southern California. And then about 10 years later, after they had odds and end jobs, construction and working on assembly lines and down in Southern California, the GM Pontiac plant. They worked there for a good while. And then eventually they started their own landscaping and gardening business. And that's what they did for the remainder of their working careers. So yeah, they were farmers back in Syria. That both my father's and mother's side were both farmer families. And so when they came here, that was, kind of at first fish out of water, not knowing what to do, but eventually coming into their own and setting up their own businesses. And then, like I said, I was born in Southern California. I grew up there. My family wasn't particularly very, devout Muslim family. But, we celebrated Eid, we celebrated Ramadan and things like that. But as far as daily, we just didn't, that wasn't something that was, that I grew up with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, if your parents were actually Muslim or Christian, because your grandfather, being that he came to the U.S. at such a young age and during that time, I do know, like, some reports that talk a lot about how many of the early immigrants to the United States were actually allowed or given citizenship prior to the 60s. Many of them actually were Christians, Syrian, a lot of them actually went to Detroit as well. A lot of them worked for Ford Motor Company. So that's why I'm really curious about it, So, yeah, sorry to cut you off. Yeah, but you clarified, they actually were Muslims. You were raised Muslim here. Yeah.
He cut out a little bit, but that's okay. No, they were Muslim. And one of the stories that we know about my grandfather was that he was in the community. If somebody got sick, they would call him to come and read Quran over the ill person. So I don't know to what extent how religious he was, but to have them, he was the guy that they called to come and read.
Outside religion.
Yeah. So mashallah. But alhamdulillah, as I was growing up, I mean, my father, Allah rahmahu, he passed away when I was 10 years old. And so early on, that really got me started thinking about, why people die, where do they go, and all of that. And so I became, over the years, kind of interested in just kind of understanding that aspect of life. And then when I got to high school, this was in the early 80s, there was this, at that time, there was this big push in the Christian community about rock and roll music and satanic messages in the records, and when you play the records backwards and all of that. And it was this big thing. And so I remember in our campus, there was a big thing about that. And at the time, I had three friends. They were all non-Muslim. One of them was a Reformed Jew. I had a Mexican boy who was Catholic, and then a white Protestant. And I remember we were walking on campus one day, and this big fervor about, satanic messages in rock and roll and all of this stuff was coming around. And so they asked me, they said, "You're Muslim, right?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "Do you believe in the devil?" And I didn't have an answer for them.
Oh, really?
So I didn't have an answer. I said, "Well, I don't know. Would you ask me if I believe in him?" I'm like, "What does that mean?" So I came home that afternoon, kind of with all this fervor about this fear. And I said, I need to find out. And so I know my father had a English translation of the Quran, Muhammad Fiqh translation, in one of the bags that were stored in the closet. So I went in there secretly and I took it out, and I wanted to read it so that I understood what it was, and the fear that I had about the 666 number and all of that was rotating around. The first thing I did was I opened the Quran to the very last page to see what was the last number on the page, because I was so worried. What was that to do if I got to that page number? It was just ignorance. We just didn't know. So I started reading, but subhanAllah, within the first 50 ayahs of the Quran and Surah Al-Baqarah, I already know everything I needed to know about Shaitan. I said, "Oh, he's not worried about it." Yes. Believe it or not, say la ilaha illallah. What do I have to worry about? I mean, he only has whispers. Like, so what? So alhamdulillah, but it really, I started engaging with the Quran in that way. I didn't know how to read Arabic. I asked my parents several times, my uncles, if they would teach me, and they just said, yeah, someday. Someday, unfortunately, never came. But I read the Quran, every single day, and to the point where I would have passages in English completely memorized.
What age did you say you were at the time, around this time?
I was in high school, probably the 11th grade, so around 16 or 17 years old. And I just read it every day, and when you came to the passages where it said to, make prostration, I didn't know what exactly that meant, but I, knew that Muslims kind of made sajda. And so I just made a sajda, wherever I could. And then for some reason, which is again a mystery to me, like in the morning when I would wake up to read, I would do like 2 sajdas, and I don't know why. And then it was like at dhuhr time in the afternoon, especially when I would come home from school, I would get to the Quran, I would do 4. And I don't know why I did 4. I just did 4. It just seemed like, okay, I should do more. And the same thing would happen like in the evening at Isha, I would do more. And then later, of course, when I, learned how to do the salah, and I'm like, subhanallah, I mean, what was that, Oh, so, yeah. And so when I finally, I graduated, I never had intended to go to college. I actually wanted to be a forest ranger, but my mother, Allah rahmah, she wouldn't have that. And so she gave me the option, as all, Arab parents give their children, you can be a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer. And so I said, well, okay, I don't think I can be a doctor, because if I messed up and hurt someone, I don't think I could live with myself. Right. And I don't think I could be a lawyer, because they had a reputation of being liars. And I'm like, I don't think I could do that. I said, what exactly do engineers do? And they said, they make stuff. And I said, oh, I love making stuff. So I'm just not being an engineer. And went down that path. And alhamdulillah, it wasn't really until I got to graduate school that I found Stanford had an Arabic program to teach, to learn Arabic. And that's where I took the class and started to learn Arabic. It wasn't very helpful. They start you off in the first quarter, you learn your letters and vowels and sounds. And then I started the second quarter, and the first day we sit down, he starts talking about the idafa. And I'm like, the what now? I had no clue what he was talking about. So after a week or so of the second quarter, I went in and I spoke with the professor about it. And he asked me why I was taking Arabic. I said, I want to learn how to read Quran. And he goes, this is not the class for you. And I said, what do I do? And he scribbled a name on a Post-it note, handed it to me with a phone number. He goes, call this guy. He's one of the religious types here on campus. He'll help you. And I did, and called him, and he was more than happy. They said, we do a halaqah every Friday evening in the student union. You're welcome to come, and I'll meet you there, and we can meet everyone else, and we'll help you out. And subhanallah, I went there, and that was I just fell in love right there with the brothers that were there, the community. It was a beautiful community on campus. And they were so generous, mashallah. Within a year, I was reading Quran like I'd been reading it all my life, alhamdulillah. So yeah. So that's kind of how I came into it. And it was from there on in, it was just meeting other Muslim students and getting kind of plugged into the community here in the Bay Area, and meeting different people, and eventually I met someone who told me about Sheikh Hamza Yousef teaching Arabic in the masjid. And so I went and asked if I could join the class, and then that was it. He was really my first real Arabic teacher.
How old were you now? So how was it in your 20s now? Or this is
I'm now at this point. Let's see. I'm about 27.
Okay.
28 maybe. Yeah, maybe 27, 28 at that time when I first met him. And I studied Arabic with him for about 3 years.
Okay.
So we went through the New Arabic Grammar with from Haywood and Ahmed. That.
Yeah.
And then we studied the Ajurumiyya. We did that for a number of. I think I went through that class with him about 2 times. And then, all of a sudden, one thing led to another. And one morning is really, I had finished my thesis.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was reflecting on, in the Quran, it comes in, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِذَا رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. And I thought, you know what? I don't have anything to do now. Maybe it's time I just, do some devotion. So I decided that I would go to Masjid al-Nur, which is in Santa Clara. And I wanted to do i'tikaf because I had nothing else to do. Mm-hmm. So I remember it was on a Jum'ah, and I had packed up what I thought I needed. And I prayed Jum'ah, and I remember seeing Sheikh Hamza afterwards and asked him, can you give me the rules about i'tikaf? What do I need to do? And he looked at me and he says, well, in the Maliki madhab, i'tikaf is only in the Ramadan. And I said, oh, I kind of deflated. He goes, but it's okay. The Hanafis allow it any time of the year. And I said, okay, what do I do? So he gave me the ins and outs, and I went to Masjid al-Nur and I camped out in the masjid. Mm-hmm. That was a Friday. Friday night, I had a dream. Mm-hmm. I dreamt that I was going to give Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi a hug in the masjid.
Oh, really?
And I'd met him years ago because he came to Stanford when Thomas Cleary gave a talk. So he had come to that talk, and I'd met him years ago. And so, just a strange thing that I had a dream. The next morning at Saturday at Fajr, we wake up to pray, and he's leading the Salah, Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi. And I was like, okay, wait, what's going on? This is really, really strange. Yeah. So the Shafi'is, they do a qanut in the Subh prayer, right? In the Fajr prayer, they raise their hand. So the brothers who were praying that morning after the prayer had finished asked him, why did you make the qanut? They were kind of perplexed. So him and Sheikh Hamza gave an impromptu fiqh lesson on prayer. And I'm sitting back in my corner at i'tikaf, and I'm listening to this whole lesson going on. Mm-hmm. And as they're describing the prayer according to the different madhabs, I'm like, oh, I do this according to that madhab. I do this according to this madhab. I do that according to this madhab. And then in the end, they said, all the madhabs are valid, and you can follow any one of them, but stick to one and don't mix things between madhabs because you might invalidate something. And that's when it hit me. I said, I don't even know how to pray. Mm-hmm. And then that was it. They got up and they left. Mm-hmm. And I was just too dumbfounded after that lesson to even move. And so the next morning on Sunday, Sheikh Abdullah was leading the prayer again. And so I got up enough courage that morning to get up to him. I stopped him as he was walking out. And I said, look, I had a dream that I was going to hug you in this masjid. So I need to fulfill the dream. I did that. And then after the i'tikaf was done, I think it was the next day I was planning on finishing. I went to Sheikh Hamza and I told him, I said, can you teach me how to pray? And he looked at me perplexed. He says, you know how to pray. And I said, no, I don't. I listened to you and Sheikh Abdullah the other day. My prayer is completely messed up. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what madhab you're on, but I want one madhab and just that. And I'm not going to, move away from it. I just want to know what I'm doing and make sure that I'm doing it right. Mm-hmm. So he gave me a really poor copy of Al-Risala, translation of Al-Risala. Mm-hmm. And he goes, read this one. He goes, if you have trouble, the translation is not that good. If you have trouble, just ask me and I'll help you out. And so I read it. It was very confusing. The translation was really, really bad. I came back to him and I asked him, because he'd already been teaching Arabic for years. And I came up and I said, would you consider teaching fiqh? And he says, do you think people would take the class? I said, well, I don't know about anyone else, but I know I would. And it wasn't long after that, subhanAllah, that suddenly Zaytuna Institute was a thing.
Okay, mashallah.
Yeah.
So one says you're the catalyst of that. You're the catalyst of Zaytuna. Don't say it. I'll say it. I'll say it.
It was in the works ahead of time, and I think I just might have been the keystone that just kind of knocked the whole arch up down. Yeah. Everything came down. Inshallah, I hope so. Because Zaytuna, mashallah, has just been a blessing for this community, inshallah.
So Sheikh, so you were one of the few people who had personal, private sort of interaction with Sheikh Hamza, as a student. Of course, it's hard for most people, it's hard for them to actually get that type of access these days, naturally, and it's usually the case with, famous and big sheikhs and, even in the Muslim world, that after a certain time, once they become popular, it becomes very difficult to actually find private time with them. So alhamdulillah, I'm actually glad I was able to do that with some of my teachers as well, right? But
Well, I mean, back then there was no internet. There wasn't any of the social media stuff that we have today. So people were primarily, you were known in the community, and that was it. I mean, he was pretty much known around the country, but as far as the wide reach that we have, that he has today, or anyone for that matter, is really limited back in the 90s. I mean, so, and my ignorance, not knowing who Sheikh Hamza really was, it was just, he was the guy who was teaching Arabic, and I sat with him, and he seemed to, and he was very knowledgeable, and it because of the lectures that he would give and the classes that he would give. He knew what he was. You felt comfortable asking for his tutelage, and it was wonderful at that time. Alhamdulillah.
Right. Well, alhamdulillah, mashallah. I really appreciate, giving us a sort of an overview of of your journey.
So that was kind of my journey, to getting and now, so I don't know when Zaytuna became an institute, we all worked. There was a lot of people in the background that really, there were a lot of people that really helped get Zaytuna off the ground, and once it became what it was, and we were just happy to be part of it, and then when it finally moved to becoming a college, I didn't see any role for me at that point. There wasn't really anything that I thought I could do, because it was a seminary, and I'm like, well, I'm not a scholar at, of any stretch of the imagination that I'd be able to teach anything in a seminary. And so I said, okay, well, I bowed out and I said, if you guys need me, I'm here. If not, then Bismillah. I hope this endeavor, becomes successful. And it wasn't until 2013. Yeah, 2013 at the I think one of the fundraisers for Zaytuna College, Sheikh Hamza came up and asked if I could teach mathematics, and I said, where? He said, at Zaytuna, and I said, why? What do you need mathematics at Zaytuna? It's a seminary. He goes, no, we're trying to get accreditation as a college, and we need quantitative reasoning. And I said, yes. What kind of math do you want? He says, just draw up a curriculum and let me know what you think. And then we did it, and alhamdulillah, I came in, I started teaching math for the first couple of semesters, I think 2 semesters. Before the end of the first semester, he came and asked if I could teach astronomy, and I said, yeah, inshallah, we could do that too if you'd like. So we did an astronomy course, and then the second year, Dr. Asad Tersin, he couldn't teach the Maliki Fiqh course anymore, and so they asked if I could, and I said, well, yes, I think I don't know if my credentials will meet what you need, but I can. And so, alhamdulillah, I've been teaching the Maliki Fiqh since that time as well. So,
look at that. I mean, you felt like, that you weren't needed, but Allah decided that, yes, you are. And alhamdulillah.
And the amazing thing is, like, when I was in graduate school, I really felt like, because that's where the fire for learning about Islam really became ignited with me, because I was actually able to read Quran in Arabic, and it really propelled me to want to learn the deen. And I had felt by that time that I had really kind of wasted my time studying engineering, because I really didn't think I was going to do anything with it. And I felt kind of remorseful that I wasted, nearly 12 years of my life studying engineering where I could have studied the deen. And, but subhanAllah, had I not studied, all the science and engineering that I had studied, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to, who knows, Allahu A'lam, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to teach what I'm teaching now at Zaytuna.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that you mentioned the fact that we have quantitative sciences at Zaytuna, because I still think that a lot of people in our community still have a misunderstanding of what the liberal arts are. But, the classical liberal arts, the trivium, the quadrivium, the arts of the mind, arts of matter, fundamentally, when it comes to the quantitative, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music traditionally, but of course we don't study music, we have tajweed, so you actually, what's different about this particular interview is that unlike other interviews, I wanted to actually delve into some of the your areas of expertise, which are very unique, I guess you would say, for most members of our community, at least those I've interviewed so far. Of course, there are other people in our community we know are engineers, naturally, but people who are engineers also have a good grounding in Islamic studies, and so you actually, it's mathematics, astronomy. I mean, how did you even develop an interest in those things? Of course, I imagine that some of it was part of your course of study at Stanford and other schools. But we also know you to be the moon sighting authority here on the West Coast. And how did that come about?
Well, I mean, it's like I said, I just had this desire to really learn my deen in the beginning. And so one, I had to learn as much Arabic as I could so that I could understand what I was reading. And then once I realized, even though the brothers on campus taught me to pray, and may Allah bless them and reward them for every prayer that I pray, because they taught me how, I still wanted to know, with certainty what I was doing in my deen. And so that's really what drove me to want to learn the fiqh. And as far as the moon sighting, that was something that occurred early on when I came to graduate school. The first Ramadan that I was there, that was probably my biggest worry. And it was the first time that I'd moved away from home, is I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do for food. And my mother, Allah rahmaha, she was someone who, she was very serious about making sure the food that we ate was good, clean, halal food. And so when I moved up here, she said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure you freeze stuff, you bring it with you, and everything will be fine. And when Ramadan came, I said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in Ramadan. This is going to be really, really hard. And then the brothers on campus said, no, don't worry. We have a round robin every night of Ramadan. Someone does iftar. So don't worry, you'll be fine. And so that first Ramadan, at one of the iftars, a couple of brothers were debating about how the month was supposed to end. And they started talking, and one of them went up there and started doing all these calculations on a chalkboard in the room that we were in, and the other one was arguing back and forth with him. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm thinking, this is the most bizarre discussion I've ever heard. I said, Eid, Ramadan? I said, isn't that just you get a phone call? Because that's growing up, that's what happened. Ramadan came and we got a phone call from Syria, and they were saying Ramadan Mubarak, and everyone was happy. And then when Eid came, there was another phone call, and it was like, Eid Mubarak. And I'm like, what's going on here? So the fervor around this discussion started building for about a year and a half. And then like on the second or third Ramadan, when I was there on campus, it was a big debate on campus. And so the president of our Muslim group, he said we're going to have he's assigned someone to do the research on this. He's going to present. And when we came into that night for that presentation at that halaqah, he said, I'm going to be really strict today on comments and questions. You let the brother finish the presentation first, because he's done the work. Then we're going to have one round for questions and one round for comments. No comments in the question round and no questions in the comment round. He was really strict about it. So he did the presentation, and in the presentation, of course, he related the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad saying, fast when you see the new moon and break your fast when you see the new moon, and if you don't see it, complete 30 days. And so anyways, I was still new. I didn't know very much. And so I listened to everything. And when it came time for questions, I didn't have a question. And so I passed. And I was in the halaqah, as it went around, you had the speaker was here, and then it went around to the right. And then I was near the end of the loop. So I was at the very end. And when it came to me, I didn't have a question. Okay. So it passed. And then comment round. So when it came back around to me, I suddenly had a comment, but it was more of a question. And so I was really scared to raise my hand and say anything, but I raised my hand, and I turned to our Amir, Abdullah, and I said, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't have a question during the question round, but I have a comment and a question, and I don't know what to do. And he says, don't worry, you're new. We'll let it slide this time. And I said, oh, thank you. So I asked him, I said, okay, here's my comment. I've listened to everything, and it seems that hadith makes it very easy to work out the beginnings and ends of the months. And here's I said, so I really resonate with that. Here's my question. And I address it to everybody here in the room. Those of you who are arguing for calculations and those of you who are arguing for moon sighting, and specifically to those of you who moon sight, how many of you have actually gone out to do it? And no one answered in the affirmative. And I said, and they no one answered. I said, if no one has gone out to look for it, then why are you arguing for it?
Right.
And that kind of, and since I was near the end of the loop, there was no one else to say anything. So it was like kind of the last word on it. Yeah, Abdullah turned and he goes, I think we should do what Yousef says. We should go out and look for the moon. And so I don't remember what happened that month, whether or not we saw it that for that end of the Ramadan or not. But I made a point to myself. I said, look, I think I'm going to go out and start looking for the moon. So the following month I went out. And I thought I saw it, but when I came back and I told people, they said, no, you didn't see it. You must have seen something else. And I said, okay. So that just made me more adamant that I'm going to find this moon. Right. So it took me a few months, but I finally got into the cycle. And I remember the first month, it was in October. It was in 1993. And I remember sitting over here in the Santa Cruz Mountains on one of the open space preserves, just sitting there watching. And I remember I came in on the 27th day. I didn't see anything after sunset. I returned on the 28th day. I didn't see anything on the sunset. I came back the next day on the 29th. I don't recall if it was the 29th or 30th, but I remember sitting for 3 nights. And on that third night, I saw the crescent moon. And I said, that's got to be a new moon, because I didn't see it the night before or the night before that. And when I came back and I told people that I had been seeing it, that I saw it, they didn't believe me. And so I said, well, okay, I'll prove it. And so I had a camera, a point and shoot camera that I took with me the following month. And I waited for it to appear and I took a picture, but the pictures were just blurry because I was holding it with my hand and it was dim lighting and everything. So I said, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I think I need a better camera. And that started me down this path of photography, which, good or bad, it bit me really hard once I tried learning how to use a manual camera. But within about 3 or 4 months after I picked up a camera, I had a photograph of the new crescent moon. And when people would ask, I would just show them the photos. And we had, it's interesting back in the 90s, especially on campuses, and I'm sure it was probably everywhere. Anyone who was from Saudi Arabia had some kind of an authority behind them. I don't know why, but on our campus, the Saudi contingency of our group were like the ones who said yes or no to anything. So the leader of their little group came over to my apartment one evening, and he'd never visited me before. And he came in and started chit-chatting with me. And I'm wondering, why are you here? And then eventually he, brought up the thing. So people are saying, you see the moon? And I said, yes. He goes, how do you know? I said, because I see it. And he says, but you're not in the desert. And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? And he goes, you've never been trained. And I said, to do what? He goes, to see the moon. I said, but I have eyes.
Eyes, right? Yeah.
He goes, look, I have a sheikh back in Riyadh. I said, yeah. He goes, he has a wall on the west side of his house. And it has 12 holes in that wall. And he stands in a specific place. And he looks at each hole for any given month. And if the moon is in that hole, then it's there. If it's not there, it's not there. And I said, that's amazing. How does he know how to do that? He goes, well, that's the thing. They've studied this, right? And I said, well, I think I know what I'm looking at. And he goes, but how? I said, hold on. So I went back, pulled out my photograph, and I came back. And I showed him. I said, this is how I know. He looks at the photograph carefully, and he says, I don't see anything. So I pointed out to him right there. I said, do you see it right there? And I said, yes, I had to have in order to point the camera at it. And then he goes, no, I think you know what you're doing.
Oh, really?
And then yeah, from that day on, nobody on campus questioned. If I told them I saw the moon, they knew the month started, and it was it. Yeah. So, and then it became the thing for me because the camera bug bit me really, really hard. And so I started photographing everything, in between that month, I'd be photographing. Most of my stipend, unfortunately, started going towards film and developing because I was so just lost in photography. Right. But eventually I started photographing the moon every single month, and I've been doing it now for over 30 years now. So, and I've got
have you missed a month since then?
I have. There have been some months where I didn't see it, and some months when I especially after I got married, things were like difficult because I was trying to learn how to live life again with, a partner, which, when you're alone, you just get up and leave whenever you want to leave, do whatever you want to do. Yeah. So there were a few months in the early years of my marriage where I didn't go out to look for it. but dragging my wife in tow. Come on, we got to go look for the moon. We got to go look for the moon. And then, but some months I'll go out and we just don't see it, and so what do? Allah didn't bring it out. So, but I go out every month, alhamdulillah, and I've raised my kids to do the same. And, alhamdulillah, 2009 is when we started Crescent Watch.
Okay.
Yeah, because there was a big fervor around that time about calculations, and everybody wanted to calculate, and so we decided, let's try to stick to the Sunnah. Let's set up a website where we can announce, the sightings and try to start building a network. And we've got a pretty good network right now across the entire country, mashallah. And we've collaborated now with Chicago Hilal, and so it's over the last 30 years, I've really seen the moon sighting endeavor get better and better, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. I remember when you first started, and I remember the way things were before that, right? And I mean, I think we've matured. Our community has matured, a lot, I guess you'd say, when it comes to the moon sighting issue. I mean, in the sense that most people are like, "Hey, man, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do," right? But you remember that time, every single year, the moon wars, the Crescent Wars, every single year. You could. I mean, we still have that, coming up.
We still have it. I mean, there's still some that
but
goes
it's not
on,
as,
but
I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I don't think it's bad as it used to be, right?
No, exactly.
Really bad at one time.
Yeah, it's much better. I mean, this month for Dhul Qa'dah, from last Wednesday when we were looking for it, the first time we actually got a report from St. Paul, Minnesota. First time, and we actually he sent an email to Crescent Watch. It was the first time, and I said, okay, let's call him. I called him up and I spoke with the brother, and and I told him, I said, this is the first time we've ever got a report from St. Paul, Minnesota. And I said, I thanked him, and I said, may Allah reward you for it. Please continue doing it, and please send in your reports. He goes, yeah, our community really doesn't follow the moon sighting. They just do calculations. I said, well, here's your chance to crack that nut, and invite people to come with you, and get them excited about it. And once you see it with your own eyes, it just fills you with joy. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah. I mean, what you do is so vital for everyone. It's like, I mean, we have these religious obligations. We have to pray at certain times. We have to fast at certain times.
Right.
We have to pray in a certain direction as well, right? And of course, our prayers are to be sort of executed within the realm of what we call reality, right? In other words, and so we always have to be certain that that we have the proper assumptions, that we actually perceive, or we conceive of things as they truly are, right? And I think that's an extremely important part of just the practice of Islam itself, right? So I mean, so what you're doing is so essential, and of course it's science, right, as well, right? So that
exactly, yeah.
I mean, Islam has never had a sort of clash with science. There was some uneasiness about rationality, but not so much with science, right? So, but then sometimes science, can be a problem because of different theories, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, the whole science of tawqeet is something it's ingrained in our tradition from the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, the whole sunnah of moon sighting took place during the hijrah. When the Prophet ﷺ saw the hilal for the first, well, not for the first time, but saw the hilal and made the dua that we make after we see the hilal, and just the prayer times themselves are all tied to the motions of the sun, and everything's timed with these celestial clocks that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in his creation, and that's how we determine when we do the things that we do to worship Allah. It's all based on his creation. And to understand, because to understand the motions of the sun, and it's interesting because, a lot of times they'll say that it's the position of the sun, but it's really the shadows that we're looking at, right? Yeah. It's the shadows that we're using in order to determine the prayer times, and it's for all the prayer times, regardless. I mean, because at Fajr, for example, it's when your locality is coming out of the shadow of the earth. Right, because when the sun is behind the earth or below the horizon, you're in the shadow of the earth. Yeah. So as you're coming out of that shadow, you pray Fajr. Once as you go through the morning and into Dhuhr, right, the shadow continues to shorten, and until the shadow starts to increase again, that's when prayer starts. And then when the shadow gets long enough, that brings Asr in. And we get into the details if you want. But, and then Maghrib is when when your locality is back in the shade of the earth again, right? Because the sun has dropped below the horizon. So now you're in the shadow of the earth again. And then once Isha comes in is when you're completely in the shade, right? So you don't see any sunlight anymore. So it's really about shadows is what we're looking at. Yeah, and it's understanding, and it's really understanding how the shadows change.
Yeah.
With I don't know how you want to consider time, but how the shadows change with time is how we dictate when the prayers come in, and it's not as simple as it was made out to be. I mean, for decades, probably from the 60s when we had the big immigration wave of Muslims that came across into the United States. The prayer times, unfortunately, and may Allah reward the brothers who put together those prayer time schedules when they first arrived, but they didn't model it correctly. You know, they just didn't model things right. You know, they said, they just put Fajr, an hour before sunrise, and they did 5 minutes after sunset. And then Dhuhr was like a minute after the sun was at its zenith. And all of these times are easy to calculate, right? They're very simple calculations, but they don't match what the fiqh explains.
Right.
And so that was something that really kind of
Did you notice with all major sort of schedules? Right. This is
all the schedules, they all follow everything, even every phone schedule. People use their phones now. All the models, all that are being used, they stem back to that original. There's a publication called North American Prayer Schedules. It was published by ISNA. I've seen the book. We have it. They actually have a copy of it at the Stanford Musalla. And that's where I first saw it. And but yeah, they have the formulas in the back of that book, and it's just timetables for major cities in North America. And those are the same calculations that are being used, in all the apps. And they unfortunately they missed the mark. I mean, they did a good service by helping people by coming with timetables.
Right. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with timetables as long as the model that's being used to actually predict the times are accurate according to how the Sharia wants us to do the prayer times.
Right. So it seems like they're more just like approximates, right? It's okay. Well, Asr time. Well, we'll just sort of add an hour and a half or hour after Dhuhr.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because the only calculation they did that was actually correct was Asr.
Oh, okay.
Because that's the only calculation where they said the shadow has to be the length of the object beyond, the Dhuhr time. And it always kind of perplexed me as to why did they use it then, but they didn't use the Sharia understanding of prayer times on any of the other prayers. Or to be careful about what they say was shuruq, sunrise, and what sunset, because astronomically with the simple formulas, sunset and sunrise is when the center of the sun was on the true horizon. But at the center, you've already had shuruq, and you wouldn't have had maghrib yet, and so it was kind of a mystery as to why they didn't make, the 60s wasn't that.
So you're saying that Maghrib time seems to be a bit too early or too late?
No, it's too early. Because they're calculating sunset, and sunset is at the center of the sun, so you still have half the sun sitting above the horizon. And so they add like 5 minutes, but 5 minutes sometimes might not be adequate because of refraction. There's a lot of things that go into trying to predict when the sun is actually below the horizon, so you got to be a little bit careful. And it always worried me that people were breaking fast too soon, that they were praying Maghrib too soon. And it always worried me, and so I started building a reputation of being a troublemaker, because
well, kindred spirits, huh?
Yeah, and I'm good at that.
Yeah, but it's just in a bit different way, so but yeah, I mean,
I've always told my science students when I was teaching science, I always told them, I said, troublemakers are the ones that change the world.
That's right.
Sometimes for the worst, but most of the time for the better. It's okay to be a troublemaker, you know.
It's hard to kind of just this go with the flow, right? It's like when you know something's wrong, it's like, well, I can't go with that, right? You know, I have to say something about it. You know, people listen, they don't. At least I'll make the correction myself. You know, so at least I'm not, held responsible for it. But I let everyone know. So, I mean, so it seems like with the prayer times is like usually I hear talk about, okay, well, Fajr time, okay, what's the proper, how do we sort of determine the proper Fajr time or proper time to pray Fajr, or the proper time to stop eating before us begin our fast, and then it's the issue of Maghrib, and then certain places in the world it's like Isha becomes a challenge, right?
When you go really high in the northern latitudes and in deep southern latitudes, Isha becomes a real issue, because you might not actually.
There you go.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my connection up here drops sometimes.
Yeah, up there where away from civilization. So So we were talking about issue of Isha.
When you're really high northern latitudes and really low southern latitudes, you'll get in some situations where you never get a true night. Mm-hmm. The light never gets completely gone from the horizon, and so it becomes. I know in the Hanafi Madhab they have a lot of different opinions regarding what they do for Isha. Mm-hmm. Some opinions are you just go to the middle point of the night between sunset and sunrise, and that's when you pray Isha. Others are they still use the same hour and a half after sunset, and then one other opinion is that you don't pray Isha.
Oh, really?
If the condition for it doesn't appear, then there's no
makes sense. It makes sense.
So I know with the Malikis, you just use the closest place that has a normal prayer time, and you just follow that. And so, but it could be an issue, for people who live in really far northern and southern latitudes. It poses a challenge,
Yeah. Well, what about Fajr? I mean, sometimes I talk about the issue of the angle, the proper angle, and
right. Like that. I see a lot of numbers, and a lot of the students, especially during the astronomy course, they have a lot of questions regarding these angles that are usually mentioned. 18 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees. Mm-hmm. What we know from modern astronomy now, there is no sunlight if the sun is 18 degrees, when the sun reaches 18 degrees below the horizon, that's the first instance that you can have any sunlight reaching the atmosphere above the horizon.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If the sun is below that, there is no physical light that can be measured. Mm-hmm. So when I run across some of the traditional texts on prayer time and they're listing 19, 20, 21 degrees, I'm not sure how they saw light at those measurements. Mm-hmm. And it brings question to me as to how did they know that the sun was at those degrees, right? Mm-hmm. What's the measure? Because they didn't have even though their astronomy was accurate for positions of stars and the motion of the sun, but how did they know that they didn't have calculations the way we have now that can predict exactly where the positions of these celestial objects are. So it was always a mystery to me as to how they ascertained that value. The only thing that I could think of is that they know how we've known for millennia that the sun moves a given amount each evening, each day, in relation to the stars themselves. Mm-hmm. And so when you see a star rising above the horizon at Fajr, you would know how many degrees away the sun was from that star.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so at best, it would have had to have been an approximation as to where the sun was when that star appeared on the horizon. So that's the only thing that I could think of that's how they came up with those numbers to indicate Fajr. But today, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the darkest place on the planet, at 20 degrees, you're still not going to see light on the horizon. Okay. 18 is when it first comes in. And at 18 degrees, they call it zodiacal light. And it's a very narrow band of light that goes vertically into the sky, not horizontally at 18 degrees. That's the exact description of Fajr al-Kadhib that we have in the book.
Yeah, right.
They describe it like a fox's tail, right? Narrow and upwards.
Like
and then as it gets, exactly. And then as the morning progresses, then that will disappear and light will start spreading horizontally. Mm-hmm. depending on where you are, that can come in at a different angle for the sun, but definitely not before 18 degrees.
Okay.
And so if you're in a very dark area, you might be able to see the horizontal light, Fajr as-Sadiq, true Fajr, coming in at around when the sun is at around 15 degrees. That's a little more than an hour before sunrise. And in what was interesting for me when studying prayer times, according to the Maliki Madhab, they break it up into like 3 different zones, right? You had Fajr al-Kadib, you had Fajr as-Sadiq, and then you had the Isfar, right? The third time. And so the descriptions were exactly how modern astronomy describes them. Fajr as-Sadiq was described in the books of fiqh as light spreading across the horizon and a lightening of the sky so that you can see silhouettes of objects, but you can't see their details.
Right.
And when you look at the astronomical definition of nautical twilight, which happens at 12 degrees, is that you can see silhouettes on the horizon, but you can't make out details. I was like, that's an exact definition of how we understand it. Yeah. So I said, okay, well, then Fajr as-Sadiq has to be at 12 degrees. But you don't find 12 degrees mentioned in the books of fiqh. I mean, it's rare that you find anyone mentioning 12 degrees. And I'm thinking, okay, then maybe you can see it sooner if you're in a very dark area. And through experience, we've been in dark, because with my photography, I've been out in the middle of nowhere, camping out, to photograph nature. And you're out there when Fajr comes in, and it's before 12 degrees. So that's probably coming in at somewhere around 15 degrees is what I can ascertain. But at 12 degrees for certain, it is definitely in at 12 degrees. And in an urban environment, because we're here in the Bay Area, and you cannot see Fajr before 12 degrees. There's just no physical way to see it. And I've tested it over and over. You can be out in the dark waiting, and all you see is the light pollution bubble on the horizon.
Okay.
At 15, at 18, you can't tell. Once 12 comes in, it is certain. There's no doubt. And you still have almost an hour before sunrise. So there's plenty of time after 12 degrees. So that's what I've always been using now for decades, to use 12 degrees. Some people don't like it. And I'm like, well, I can't tell you what to do, but go out and look for yourself. I mean,
I imagine that one particular contention might be, okay, well, the reason why you're not able to see it prior to 12 degrees is because of the pollution itself, right? You mentioned about pollution, so so they're saying, okay, well, if the pollution wasn't there, then we probably would see it.
Yeah, but then you're sitting there with a little bit of doubt, like, is it really in? Is it not in? And you want to remove that doubt so that you have certainty. And so what I did, for Ramadan is I gave, when we did the prayer times this year, I gave everyone the recommendation to stop eating, and their imsak should begin when the sun reaches 18 degrees at Fajr al-Kadib. And again, I kind of based it on what you find in hadith and kind of describing how the Prophet ﷺ commanded the Sahaba to make adhan. He would have Bilal radiallahu anhu call the adhan at Fajr al-Kadib to wake people up, right, to prepare so they can get ready. And then he would stop eating with enough time to read 50 ayahs of the Quran before the Salat al-Fajr would come in. And so I don't know, how do you gauge that? It depends on someone's ability to read.
For me, it's about 10 minutes. I tested it.
And for me, because I don't read as fast, it's probably more like 20 or 30 for me, right? And so I'm like, okay, but if you look at the time
actually, I do it like a normal pace, like maybe not tahqiq, but mahadar, or something like tartil. I mean, it's but for me, it's at about 10 minutes. So probably 10, 15 minutes. I guess it all depends on how quickly. I can read faster than that. But I kind of at a normal pace, a medium pace.
Right. Yeah, and if you look at the time difference between 18 degrees and 12, it's about 30 minutes. Depending on the time of the year, it can be anywhere from like 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm like, it's not that much a time difference to wait. And then I said, then, Fajr comes in at 12, and some of, this year, some of the students actually, had a little bit of confusion as to, well, can I eat until 12? Or do I have to stop at 18? And I said, maybe. I mean, it all depends on when Fajr comes in, and go outside and look. I said, that's your best, you're establishing certainty. So what I did was I said, okay, well, let's put 15 degrees as called an absolute imsak, right? So don't eat past 15 degrees. But if you want to eat between 18 and 15, and you got a little bit of breathing room there, but definitely you should probably stop by 15, because if you were in a dark area, you probably would see Fajr come in. So
right. Yeah, I mean, so Muslims right now today, it seemed like I mentioned before, like it seemed like there's a certain level of maturity that's developed with community, with regard to the khilaf itself, about okay, follow calculations or go out to fight the moon. Of course, we're of the party of the moon sighting. That's what we prefer. You think that's sunnah. So I think that's easy enough. It's easy enough to go out to sight the moon, because it's like, well, I actually see it. You don't have more certainty based upon the calculation. You got to tell me that you have more certainty from the calculation than me actually seeing it with my physical eye, right? So, and then there's the very fact that, okay, Ramadan is compulsory upon all Muslims. So it should be easy for the average Muslim to be able to go out and determine the start of Ramadan. Not meaning that every single Muslim has to go and start Ramadan or see the moon on Ramadan. We base it upon those people who have done it, right? And then most Muslims, when it comes to prayer schedules, we say, okay, all right, we can just follow the schedule itself. Most Muslims don't know how to actually determine the prayers. Not saying that I know how to do it myself, right? But most Muslims, okay, we follow the schedule, and we rely upon people like yourself. Because sometimes people highlight this as a contradiction. They say, well, if you're against calculations, then you're against calculation. So if you get a calculation for moon sighting, then you should be against calculation when it comes for prayer schedule. And I would say that in principle, I mean, that makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, well, I'm not I'm against it in principle too. It's just that, I try to pray within the time which I have relative certainty that the prayer actually has come in, so it's not necessarily I'm going out every single day to actually determine how long shadows are. Now, but then there's the third issue that comes up, and that's been a point of controversy for a number of years, as you know, and I think that our community, hopefully now, is mature enough to even talk about this, very briefly, on this podcast, and that's the question of the Qibla. What direction should Muslims be facing when they pray? And I'll say, I admit first and foremost that I generally pray the northeast direction. Why? Because I just find that that's the way I've been praying for most of my life. That's where most people pray. I see myself as a muqallid, as like I don't see myself as an expert in this particular area, and especially after discovering that like, for instance, like compasses, that they can be affected by the magnetic fields of the earth, and so it's like, hey, well, I go somewhere, I pull out a compass, and the compass tells me that this is where the Qibla is. It's like, well, how do I know that particular day is not one of those moments where the magnetic fields are being did, right? And my compass is off. Right. I don't really know. Yeah. Right. So like I haven't really had a strong desire to delve deeply into this particular topic, because it seems like probably everybody's doing what they're doing. I know that my salat is valid because based upon my understanding of the fiqh itself, even if I'm a bit off, I'm over here, over there, right? I'm not facing the Qibla, right? Right. And so some years ago, of course, there were people writing books about this issue. I don't think that most people have a desire to read a book about this issue, but at the same time, I do think that your perspective, because you do have your book, the Qibla comparative view, I think is what you call it. Yeah, that in itself is, I think it needs to be published. I do think it still needs to be published to give people opportunity to see the argument, because I do think that it hasn't been given justice, right? I just want to read a couple excerpts from your book, before you even open it up for you, So you hear, because you call it a paper, so it said the aim of this paper is not to create more debates, nor is it to force a method of Qibla determination on anyone. It is an attempt at compiling and comparing the various methods of determining the Qibla objectively. It is by no means exhaustive, but it is, inshallah, Allah willing, comprehensive and sufficient in the aid of those scholars who need to make a judgment regarding how the Qibla should be determined. Now, so right from the beginning, for me, it's like, okay, well, all right, here. So it sounds to me that there's a question of epistemology involved. What are the methods? There's a difference of methods, and those different methods seem to have led to two different conclusions. And then it also seemed like in the book, if I remember correctly, you're basically saying that this fundamental problem is largely a North American problem, right, as opposed to a problem in other parts of the world. And let me just read like one more excerpt just to here before I open things up for you. But so you say, like, on one page you say, the common belief in our time is that the Earth is spherical in shape. Scientists, both modern and ancient, have concluded that the Earth is a sphere, and so the majority of humans have taken that as truth. However, a small minority believes that the Earth is flat. These two differing views are one of the roots of the debate over the determination of the Qibla. This is important because the shape of the Earth will dictate the type of coordinate system used in determining locations on the Earth. Also dictate how the Qibla is determined from those locations. At the same time, there are very strong proofs for both these views, and each should be seriously considered. So in other words, you're not being dogmatic about this issue, and I really appreciate that. And that by itself is reason enough to have it published, to make it available to the public, in my opinion, right? Most of the book, it's like, you have to be a mathematician, right?
It's a mathematical problem. I mean, it is a mathematical problem. And I mean, even our classical Muslim astronomers, they approached it in a completely mathematical fashion. Mm-hmm. The scholars of fiqh and the ulama, they didn't use math. They used something known as sacred geometry, mm-hmm. Which kind of, centered the world on the Kaaba. Mm-hmm. And then they would they kind of just drew, rays that would leave the Kaaba, and they would just divide it up into like sectors. And if you were in this northern sector, you prayed south. And if you were in the southern sector, you prayed north. If you were in the western sector, you prayed east. And if you were in the the eastern sector, you prayed west. So it was a way of getting you oriented towards the Qibla without overtaxing the intellect in trying to figure out all of the mathematics that would have been necessary in order to try to work out the actual direction, if you can even say that. And so it was a completely mathematical problem in determining the Qibla. And in order to do so, they really had to, I mean, even though spherical trigonometry had already been invented by the Greeks, it was the Muslims that really refined it and developed the specific laws that are used in order to actually solve spherical triangles. And it was all done in the celestial sphere. They used, the zenith of Mecca, your zenith of wherever you happen to be, the North Star, or if you were in the Southern Hemisphere where you couldn't see the North Star, you had to use the southern celestial pole where there is actually no star there. So you had to approximate, but you solved the spherical triangle in the heavens. And then you projected that direction that was solved in that sphere down to the Earth. But it was, and if you've read through it, you've noticed how they always started out by saying that you stood on a horizon circle, which was a flat surface. Yeah, so there was always this question in my mind: did they think the Earth was flat, or did they think it was round? Because why did you start on a flat circle when you know that it wasn't a circle? So it just seemed that the methodology that was being developed was, they were using the most advanced mathematics that they had at the time. Right. Mm-hmm. And it just there, to me, there just seemed to be some sort of a little bit of a disconnect. Mm-hmm. Even though Muslims never really thought the Earth was flat from a physical standpoint, because I mean, you have like Al-Biruni, he'd already worked out the circumference of the Earth within less than 1% of the actual modern value, and this was thousands of years ago. The Greeks were even worse off. I mean, they had already worked out, Eratosthenes worked it out to about, I think it was anywhere between, depending on how they measured their unit length of the stadia, is anywhere between 16 to 40% in error. And with Biruni coming in under 1% was pretty phenomenal, using the mathematics that they had developed in trigonometry. So they knew what they were doing. But the methodology that they used required you to be on the same horizon as Mecca. If you couldn't see the zenith of Mecca, you weren't going to be able to use the formula to calculate the direction. And as soon as you were more than 90 degrees of longitude difference from Mecca, you were no longer on the same horizon. And none of the classic Muslim astronomers in their works did I ever find anything that discussed what happened if you were more than 90 degrees away, which was fine because their world, Europe, Asia, all the way to China, down through Africa, was all within the horizon of Mecca. So it worked. And no one knew that there was something on the other side. And the only astronomer that I ever saw in any of his works who hypothetically thought about what happens on the other side was Nasiruddin Tusi. He worked it out for the other side, but it was hypothetical, because they had no idea that there was any land on the other side of the earth. So, they did that. And at some point in history, they took this solution that was in the celestial sphere and they just brought it down to the terrestrial sphere. And by that time, of course, we had developed an accurate way of marking where you were on the earth. Al-Biruni has an extensive text on determining the locations of cities in relation to each other. And it's in that text that where he develops his methodology and his formulation for the Qibla as well. But, you have latitude and longitude. And it was amazing because you would think that he would have put the 0 degree longitude at Mecca, but he didn't. He put it on the west coast of Africa, which is very close to where the prime meridian is today. Prime meridian,
I think your mic is muted. I think for some reason. I'm not hearing you now for some reason.
Am I coming through?
Oh, there you go. I hear you. Come back.
Okay. Yeah, when Britain, when they were the emperors of the world, they put the prime meridian right smack dab.
Yeah, it's happening again. Your mic, your voice is going out. Sorry about that. Yeah, I can't hear you again. Maybe you lean forward. I don't know. No, I'm not hearing you. Let's see. Not able to hear you for some reason. Your mic went out. Yeah. I guess I can unmute you.
Hi.
Okay.
How's that?
Yeah, I go. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was always a mystery as to why Muslims didn't move the prime meridian. They left it on the west coast of Africa. But we have a very accurate way of measuring locations on the planet. And when it came time, for this idea of the flat Earth, it was I don't recall exactly when. It was probably in the 19th century, where this flat Earth society kind of emerged,
right?
Saying that the Earth was flat.
Yeah.
Allahu A'lam. Physically, who knows? We experience the world as flat because it's so large, but no one has ever fallen off. And no one has ever found the edge. So I don't know how to really address that question. I've had students in the classes. They would ask me, "Is the Earth round or flat?" And I would just answer yes. And that was quite perplexed. Like, what does that mean? I said yes. I'm like, it's and I'll take them. I'll usually take them down a fun rabbit hole to make them understand how perception works and some funny. Physics that takes place with the eye that actually makes them wonder if you're actually standing right side up or upside down. And if you question whether you're standing right side up or upside down, it changes the entire geometry of the Earth itself. So then what does it mean to be round or flat in any sense of the word? And I said, just don't entertain the question.
Yes. Right.
You're never going to answer it. It's just something we just don't know. If you put an ant on a basketball, it's going to think it's walking on a flat surface.
That's right.
It's too small to see the size of it. And because we're in the third dimension in space, we're never going to really understand what a three-dimensional object really is unless you can move out of that third dimension of space and be able to observe it. When we walk around the Kaaba in Tawaf,
you never see the Kaaba in its full, three-dimensional entity. You see at most 3 sides of it at most.
Right.
And if you're walking on the floor of the haram, you only see 2 sides of it. So, if it's cubic in nature, it should have 6 sides, and you can't really encompass that because you're in that same dimension. You'd have to be outside the 3rd dimension in order to be able to fully encompass what it means for a cube to be a cube or the earth to be round as a sphere.
Right.
So we have to work within the precepts, right? How we perceive things. You have to work in that realm. So when I talk about in the text about looking at the flat earth, I'm not talking about the flat earth itself. It's just that the reason even the flat earth even becomes a question is because of how we project this 3-dimensional object onto something that we can hold like a map, right? A piece of paper. Piece of paper.
Yeah, right.
And it's, again, when you talk about maps, and I don't go into it in the paper, because that, when you say the word map, if you're talking to a mathematician, that means something very different than to a cartographer or a geographer or somebody who, no one uses them today anymore because it's all on your phone. But I grew up using maps. If I wanted to get from point A to point B, I found a map of the area. I found point A. I worked out how do I travel, what roads, and want to make right turn, left turn, how far do I go to get to point B? But it was flat map. To do that is a mathematical function that takes a 3-dimensional shape and, quote, maps it over into a 2-dimensional space. That brings about a lot of continuity issues, because you can't take a 3-dimensional object and bring it into a lower dimension without
it distorts reality. It
completely distorts reality. The most famous of the 2-dimensional maps that most people know is the world map that we all see hanging in classrooms and everything, the Mercator map. And that was a map that was designed to do something very specific, because mariners needed a way to be able to navigate from one place to another across the oceans. And the only tool that they had, basically two, they had either a magnetic compass or they had the stars. And in order to move from one place to another, if you could follow a constant bearing, in other words, if I'm traveling southwest at, let's say, 215 degrees from north, and I follow that bearing, I can follow that bearing because I can keep my compass lined up to that, or I can keep my orientation to the North Star with that, and I can follow that bearing, and it'll get me from point A to point B. And that's what that map was designed to do. So it takes directions that are measured on a globe, and it keeps the same direction unchanged when you bring it to the flat map, at the expense of distorting distance north and south. So you'll have places like Greenland on the Mercator map looking large or almost larger than Africa. But it's a small little piece of land compared to Africa. But it's been distorted. And in that distortion, right, you get so what happens is on that Mercator map, if you draw a straight line from one place to another with a straight edge, and you measure the angle from the north, that angle will be a true angle if you moved it onto the globe, maintaining a constant direction. And that was the I think that was the premise that I worked on in working out what someone would say this is the flat Earth solution, even though it's not a flat Earth, because if you follow through the appendix on that solution, it's assuming it's assuming a globe, and the solution I'm looking for is how do I find that path that maintains a constant direction on the globe from one place to another. And what it turned out was the solution that I ended up working out was the actual Mercator mapping, the function that maps you from the globe to the Mercator projection. So, and I didn't know that because I'd never studied cartography before. I approached it as a purely mathematical problem and trying to solve this problem by trying to maintain a constant direction rather than trying to force a shortest distance, which is what the classical Muslim astronomers did in solving the spherical trigonometric problem in the celestial sphere. Was you find the path of shortest distance. When you look at that geometry, the spherical geometry is not the geometry that is taught in schools at any level, whether you're in high school or because it's all Euclidean. And Euclidean geometry is literally on a flat plane. There's no spherical, so to use a definition, which is interesting because when they say that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, that's a Euclidean definition. And when you're using it on a non-Euclidean geometry, the definition is kind of weak there. You have to have a better definition. So to me, having a line that doesn't change, because if you look at the actual definition of a straight line, it's a line that's even with the points on itself. That's really the definition of a straight line in Euclidean geometry. A line that is even with the points on it, which means if you were standing at a point on that line, looking down the line, you would not be able to see any points ahead of you because of the point that's immediately ahead of you.
Yeah.
So if your line wasn't straight, you'd be able to see points along the line that weren't immediately ahead of you. So when you bring that over to the globe, if you draw any line on the surface of a globe, you could see every point on that because geometrically you should be able to see through the sphere. Right. So having a definition of the shortest distance doesn't really match because the shortest distance is still going to show you points that are visible even though they're not immediately ahead of you. Right. And so I look for that definition of how do I maintain a line that is even with itself means it doesn't change its orientation. Right. And then you find yourself stuck in, well, what am I measuring my directions against? So the coordinate system is a fundamental, it's a foundation to the whole problem. So we're using this latitude and longitude coordinate system on the Earth, this net of lines that go from north to south and run from east to west. That's a perfectly good coordinate system to use. It will uniquely find your location on the surface of a sphere, but it's a two-dimensional system. Right. And in order to use it, as you move north and south, because of the curvature, it's going to warp the distances. And so that's why the Mercator map looks warped as you go to the edges. Right. But it gives you a straight line in the sense of a straight line by maintaining that constant direction. So to me, it seemed like, well, that seems like a more universal type of way of approaching it. So then I said, okay, well, let's look at them. Let's compare the two and see what happens. When you compare them side by side on every continent on the planet where you can physically stand and do prayer, the difference between the two methodologies is always less than what the books of fiqh allow for variations in the Qibla if you make a mistake, except in North America. That's the mystery, and I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? It's only in North America do we see a variation that exceeds what the books of fiqh allow as far as the variation. And then I just at that point I just threw my hands up in the air and I said, well, okay, I don't know. I obviously have no way of resolving this. But
you still would argue that that the fundamental basis of the khilaf is a difference in the theoretical approach or the particular sort of I guess you say the that's where they're employing in order to like reach the conclusion that they're trying to reach. So you have there's the spherical trigonometry as opposed to the what do you call it, the what was the term used for us?
The actual path that I discovered,
the Loxodrome method, right? Loxodrome method, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, those two, and
both methodologies start with a sphere. I mean, it's not like I'm building the Loxodrome on the flat surface. I'm building it on the sphere itself, and that path is just a spherical spiral. It's a spiral that maps out on the surface of the sphere. It's not the shortest path, but it maintains the constant direction. Right. And like I said, it was very I don't want to say this very eye-opening when I compared the two methodologies in the different continents, and the variations were so slight, except here in North America, and it just was like, why? And I don't have an answer for that. I just don't have an answer. And so I just, the paper this whole issue here in North America started way before I ever came on the scene, for sure. I've heard stories of masajids that used to be facing southeast, which is the general direction that the Loxodrome, indicates. And when that wave of Muslims, immigrants came in the 60s and changed it to the Northeast based on the trigonometric formulation, which, by the way, is called an orthodrome, said that's the direction. And community split. They would have fights over this issue, and then community split. You'd have one masjid down in the area praying southeast and the other one praying northeast. And if you look historically, I have a paper from one PhD student who did his thesis on the Qibla, the history of the Qibla, not the mathematical aspect, but he traced the history of it here in North America. The first wave of Muslims who came, both in it's in Illinois. I have to look up the paper again to see exactly where it was. There's two masjid. They compete with each other to the claim of being the first masjid in North America. One is in Illinois. The other one is in New Hampshire, a Bosnian masjid, and both of them faced in the southeastern direction. So the first Muslims here had that. I guess, what do you want to call it?
Laxodromic.
Fitra. Yeah. I don't know what else to call it, really. Even when I first picked up the Quran and I wanted, it says face the Qibla, and what did I do? The first time I opened up a map, because we had an atlas at my home, opened it up, and I'm looking at the atlas. I'm saying, okay, I'm here. I'm north of Mecca, and I'm west of Mecca, southeast, and I just kind of faced in the southeast direction because that's what just your intellect would just readily say. That's where I should face. But you draw the map the other way, we could be facing the other direction. I mean, Allahu Alam, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
So anyway, so in 1993, there was a group out of Philadelphia that published a small booklet that really kind of made takfir of anybody who prayed in the northeast direction, which was very, very troublesome. And then shortly after that little booklet came out, one person from the ISNA organization, he wrote a rebuttal to it, calling it, his paper was the correct Qibla, and he went through and he argued for the trigonometric formula, and I don't know, it was a difficult paper to read because it made light, and not only made light, but kind of, in a sense, arrogantly really put down anyone who didn't understand the trigonometric formulation. I said, that's not fair. That's really not fair. And so when I seeing all of this, that's when I asked myself that question: can I get from here to Mecca following a direction that doesn't change? And I worked out the mathematics for it, and I came up with an answer. And I remember, I even went to the mathematics department on campus, and I asked some graduate students who were in a discussion. I broke in and made up a story that I was doing some research in my lab, and I needed to know if this mathematical formulation that I'm doing is conformal, which is a special jargon that that the directions stay the same when you map from one geometry to another. And there was 4 or 5 of them in the room having the discussion. I asked them if it was conformal, and they all suddenly just stopped. They looked at me and they went deep into thought. And I was waiting, and I'm looking at them, and they're like, that's a really good question. And they thought about it for a minute, and then they said, I think it is conformal. And I said, okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know. And I walked away, and then I finished that formulation. And then I asked my roommate, Muslim brother, and he was in electrical engineering, and they do a lot more mathematics, high-powered mathematics than we do in mechanical engineering. So I asked him to look over my mathematics. He looked at it, he goes, what is this for? And I explained to him what I was trying to figure out. And he says, well, what did you find out? What's the direction? I said, I don't know. I haven't put the numbers in yet. He goes, why not? I said, I'm afraid. He goes, okay, what? I said, I'm afraid. What if it tells me it's not the way we've been praying? I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. He goes, put the numbers in. Let's see what happens. So I said, okay, we put the numbers in, latitude, longitude, Mecca, and here, and Bay Area. Came out to 96 degrees from north, southeast, basically, just slightly southeast. And he looked at me, he goes, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I said, I don't have authority to make up rules and fit like that. Are you kidding? So I didn't do anything with it. At that time I had been studying with Sheikh Hamza. And so I went to him and I told him, I said, this whole thing happening with this Philadelphia group and everything. He goes, yeah. And I said, I worked out some mathematics and I came up with this, and I told him about it. I said, what should I do with it? He just looked at me, just dead silence, didn't say a word. And I'm standing there waiting for an answer. He said nothing. And I said, oh, okay, there's my answer. Do nothing, right? I took the paper, I put it away in my files, and I never touched it again. until 1996 when Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya came to visit the Bay Area, and he gave a khutbah on his last Friday here in the Bay Area, down here in Santa Clara, and he basically went in and he gave a beautiful khutbah about brotherhood, about understanding differences and loving one another in spite of the differences, and that differences were not a point of contention, but it's a point of mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, that we have difference of opinions. And if you listen to that first khutbah, the second part of the khutbah shouldn't have fazed anyone, because afterwards he stood back up and he said, I don't understand your Qibla, so I'm not going to pray with you. And he walked off the minbar, and the brother who brought him took him out the door, and they walked away. And that was like an atom bomb being dropped, and the outward explosion was going in. It hasn't recoiled yet. And after the Ratib goes up and he does the salah, and then the recoil came, and everyone just surrounded poor Shah Hamza, and it was a big problem. And 2 days later, that's when they asked about this whole thing, and I told him, I said, remember, I wrote this model. I modeled it. He says, okay, Shah Abdullah bin Baya wants a report on it. So that's what the paper was for. And I gave it to him, and he was going to take it to the Fiqh Council and actually have them determine, what a solution would be. And they didn't want to hear. They didn't want to hear the question. So,
well, I mean, alhamdulillah. I mean, at any rate, even if people never, really seriously consider it, I do think that it's worth publishing, just to add to the archives of so many other valuable types of works that Muslims have, and people can make up their own minds about what they want to do with it in the future. Those who can read it and those who can't read it. But of course, there's very difficult parts of it. Most of it, of course, I had to skim through because I'm not a mathematician. But I try to just go to the parts where I feel where it'd be easier for me to understand. But we could talk for hours. I'm quite sure about these things. But it really was a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you and to put some of your expertise on display. I hope that this will help your efforts. As a matter of fact, why don't you let everyone know how they can follow your activities? I know you talked about you have a photography company that
Mashallah. So the photography is under the company name Organic Light Photography, and there's a website, organiclightphoto.com. You can also look up Instagram. I don't do too much on social media. I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me for some reason. So it's there, and I do put the crescent moons every month that I capture them. They're on. So you look up, organic_light_photography on Instagram. You can also look up Crescent Chaser on Instagram. I have two things on Instagram. One is just specifically for the crescent, and the other one is general photography as well. And that's it. I mean, we have Crescent Watch, of course. You can definitely go on Crescent Watch, and if you're interested in following the moon sighting and starting your months according to the actual physical moon sighting, you can definitely check out crescentwatch.org. We're there every month putting up encouragements to go out and look for it, and then reports when moon sighting reports come back, inshallah. So alhamdulillah.
Well, inshallah, Dr. Yousef, really, really do appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. May Allah bless you. Until next time, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and support. Check the links in the description below to keep up with our work. Thank you.